Hey everyone, how's it going today and welcome to another episode. So, as you can tell by the title, is that in today's episode, I really want to talk about something that's very personal and deep to me. And it's not going to be a very happy video, but it is going to be a relatively important one in my opinion to really get out there. And as you can tell by the title, it's really talking about my time in the engineering world and about why I feel that engineering gave me on a personal level a little bit of depression in my life. And I want to make this very clear is that this video is not to say that engineering causes depression, because there are a lot of people that work in the engineering world that are actually very happy, and I'm very happy for them. But it's talking a lot about why my time working in engineering on a personal level gave me a level of depression that I think now that I'm no longer in engineering, have been out of the engineering world, because there's a lot of people that will make engineering videos, but one of the things I've noticed is that most people that make engineering videos have never done anything outside of engineering and have basically only been engineers. So they don't really have a basis to compare. But as someone that has been in the engineering world, that has been out of the engineering world, that is now working something outside of engineering, I'd like to think that there's actually some level of basis to compare what engineering is like versus a lot of other jobs. I specifically was someone that worked as a civil engineer in the construction industry. I think that some of this stuff, that points that we're going to cover, is going to depend on your specific type of engineering. So I'm going to try to give a little bit of a mixed balance where I'm going to talk about some things that are very specific to civil in construction, but I also want to talk about some things that might apply to basically all branches of engineering, something that's very universal that I've noticed across different niches of engineering. So it's just going to be a little bit of everything that I'm hoping to cover in today's video. Now, we're going to get right to this video, but if you guys want to share support, as always, you guys don't have to, but if you guys want to, consider liking, subscribing, hitting the bell, and feel free to leave a comment anytime. It's always great to hear from you guys who's still watching out there. And we are a very small community at the end of the day. So with that said, let's get started. So, the first reason why I really think that the engineering world, or my time in engineering, really gave me a level of depression really has to do with the social scene. And I've talked about this on this channel before, but I think it's really important to really get out there. It's that I feel that the problem with engineering is that some engineering jobs, although they might be really nice and you might be making a lot of money, there are some engineering jobs that are extremely on the introverted side, where you're basically just not interacting with people at all. And then there's a lot of other engineering jobs, such as like management, project management, and consulting, where you actually are interacting with a lot of people, those more like social jobs. But the problem with the engineering world, in my personal opinion, is that although communication skills are so important to perform on the job, it is just such a big skill that so many engineers completely neglect. I think that because of that reason, because of the social scene and the culture with engineering, it can, long story short, is feel a little bit of a very lonely profession sometimes, you know? Think of it this way, right? You're either going to have a job where you're sitting in front of the computer all day, never interacting with people, or you're going to be working a job where you do interact with people, but in a community of most people that do not really support interacting with people because of the culture, because of the introverted vibes and everything. And I know this one's going to be a little subjective, because there might be some people that think, oh, well, you know, maybe you actually are an introvert and that's not a bad thing, and you actually prefer to just isolate yourself to work. But I like to think at the very end of the day, most people, especially during the time after college when you're sort of graduated and you're kind of starting a fresh life, most human beings, we need social interaction to stay sane. And so, especially if you are an extrovert, you know, even if you're an introvert, but especially if you are an extrovert like I am, I'm an ENFP. I think especially if you're an extrovert, it's really important to be able to have a level of social interaction in your life, whether you're able to find it on the job or out of the job. But for me personally, at the time period, as someone that was kind of just rebuilding his social scene that didn't really have one, it was a very lonely profession to be in. And I think that that loneliness that, some engineers will sometimes face, that's one of the things that personally caused me depression and that might cause other people depression as well. But of course, this one's a little bit depends on, again, your branch of engineering, the lifestyle, specific role that you have in engineering. But this has been at least my personal story and my personal case. Of course, I'd love to hear yours if you guys had anything to share about this topic. But the next thing that I really want to talk about why I think engineering gave me a lot of depression is a little bit of an extension of the social culture, and it really has to do with the demographic, and maybe even more specifically, the diversity. The lack of diversity in this industry. So, wait, there's a bunch of sirens. I'm going to wait for the sirens to clear out, and then we're going to get back to this. So now that we're back. So the idea really behind this one is that objectively speaking, the other big thing about the engineering world is that there's just not a lot of diversity. I think a lot of times, and it's not just that there's no diversity in engineering. Again, this one might be more specific to being a civil engineer in the construction industry, because I'm sure other branches it might be different. But a civil engineer in the construction industry, typically, it doesn't have a lot of diversity in terms of every definition of that word diversity. There is certainly no gender diversity. It is a 90% male industry. I would argue to say that depending on the company, but at most companies, there's also not a lot of minorities. There's not a lot of people of color. And this one's a little bit more subjective, but I'd even go to say there's not a lot of mindset diversity as well. So why do I say all of this and why this is important is because when you work in an environment where representation is not very pushed, you sometimes, maybe this is because of me being a person of color or minority, but you can feel a little bit of an outlier. You can feel like it's a little bit difficult to fit into the community. And that's why I say this one will be a little bit subjective because everyone fits into a different social scene. You might find yourself as someone that really, really fits in. And don't get me wrong, I have some very close friends in that industry, and some of the best friends that I made was from my time in engineering. But collectively as a whole, I think that sometimes when you're a minority, it can feel very difficult to fit. So added onto the loneliness that we've already mentioned in the first point, the second point that I really want to make is really about the culture. And it's really about the lack of diversity and why sometimes on top of the loneliness and the lifestyle, the lack of diversity can make it very, very difficult to really be able to vibe with the people. And I think as a result, that's really the second point I want to make about why I think it led to a level of a level of depression because of what had happened. So that's just something to really get out there. But the third thing that I really want to talk about is going to now be a little bit of a stretch to something that I've noticed across many branches of engineering. So not just civil and construction, but it has to do with the industry culture. Now, and long story short in a sentence, if I had to sum this up, is that I feel that sometimes the engineering culture is very, very workaholic. And that hustle culture in particular is just something that is so preached and sometimes to a level that can be a little bit even toxic inside of the community. So one of the things I've noticed about engineering is that it is very well known that it is a very difficult road to become an engineer. It's a difficult road for a lot of professions, but I think it's very fair to say that when you become an engineer, especially again a civil engineer in the construction industry world, you are worked to death in school. You have to put up with endless assignments. When you graduate, you are now put up with endless deadlines. There is just so much work, so many deadlines, so much pressure, so much high stress that comes on with the job that I think a lot of times when you work in the engineering world, it's not just that hustle culture is so preached, but it's also that it's so encouraged to such levels of toxicity sometimes that in my personal opinion, it can lead to a lot of burnout. And I think that burnout is what causes a lot of people to become very, very depressed working in that industry. Again, this is not to say everyone's depressed. There are some people that are very happy engineers, which is awesome, and I'm very happy for them. But for other people, because of the burnout, because of the high stress, because of the hustle culture, because of the grind, because of so many things that comes with the culture of working in this industry. I think it can lead to some levels of depression when you just feel like you're working so hard all day at the cost of so many other areas of life. And I think that's going to be the next thing that I really, really want to cover, that to really preach out there. And then probably the last thing that I really, really want to talk about is something that's very specific to civil in construction, but can actually also apply to a lot of other branches, but it's just particularly true with construction. And it has to do with the work-life balance and the hours. And this one's very, very important because the thing about this industry, I think, is that on top of the hustle culture that we've already preached and mentioned like before, is that the work-life balance is very, very difficult, depending on your role, but in many, many cases at least. It's that when you work in the construction industry, because of the nature of the industry, because of the long hours, the deadlines, the early mornings, having to hit so many different moving parts that kind of happen in the industry, it can be a very difficult place to be sometimes because you're working so hard. And it's not just that you're working so hard, but sometimes it comes to a point that people sacrifice so much of their regular life and their personal life in order to be in this industry. I tell people today is that today I go to a lot of different social events catered around a lot of different social interests. I go to events that are catered around different hobbies, board games, music, the creative world, scenes, photography, all that stuff. Yet at the same time, despite going to so many different events around the city, and that's just something I really enjoy doing, I almost never run into a civil engineer. I almost never run into someone in my profession. And that should really show you something, because what this shows you is where are these people? You go out into the streets and you see so many construction projects get put up every single day. You see so many different buildings and things that are needing to be fixed. Civil engineers are all around you, but at the same time, you almost never see them at the fun events, the fun places, the vibrant areas, right? And it shows you, where are they? And the answer to that question is not out there. They're not making time to kind of, manage between personal life and everything. Most of the time, they're either always busy with their families, they're always busy just working all day because of the hustle culture that we've already mentioned. And as a result, I think that one of the biggest reasons that led to so much depression is that although I was actually relatively enjoying my job when it comes to the job itself, at least certainly the craft of the job, like what I was physically doing on a day-to-day basis, it made me realize that I was making a lot of sacrifices to my personal life that may or may not be worth it in the long run, right? I had a lot of side goals. I had a lot of people I wanted to spend time with, family, friends, things I wanted to pursue, hobbies, side hustles, goals, other side quests and all that stuff. But being in the engineering world, I never had time for that stuff, again, at least in my branch. I have heard that it's a little bit better in other branches of engineering. That's why this one's a little bit more niche to mine, but that's why I say this video at the end of the day is a little bit more of a personal take to why I think it caused me a lot of depression for me. But that's pretty much what I mostly just wanted to cover in today's video. So of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can share your personal stories as well. Would love to hear them, whether they're more happy or whether they're less happy. It's always good to kind of just express yourself out there. With that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. You guys made it to the end. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and hope to see you guys next time with a hopefully happier topic to talk about. But yep, thank you guys so much again.